Okay. Oh goodness. Oppenheimer is directed by Christopher Nolan, stars Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, Florence Pugh, Emily Blunt, and a lot of people. I'm not going to name everyone in this movie. Obviously, there's so many. It's maybe the most stacked cast of all time. For real. Like it's crazy. It's crazy how stacked some films have been this year. Maybe that's why the budgets are so huge. Like even Fast and Furious, which I didn't review, fucking insane cast. Same with obviously John Wick and Mission Impossible. Although this is actually the cheapest out of those four huge films. And it's probably it could end up making the most money. It probably won't make as much as Fast and Furious. Let's be honest with ourselves, and that's quite sad in my opinion. Not that I didn't enjoy Fast and Furious, I do. I'm a bit of a meathead in that sense, which is why it's odd that I enjoyed this film so much. Although I have to admit, it is a flawed masterpiece. That is the approach I'm going to be taking to this. I saw Oppenheimer last night, and I can't say I'm riding the high of having seen it. I also was surprised to find it's not a downer, or at least it wasn't for me. I didn't find it much of a downer in that sense. I don't think the film was particularly depressing. And what I'd mainly heard is that the ending left people sort of a bit shook, a bit haunted. And I agree that it was haunting, but it sort of just told me some things that I sort of already knew. It prodded at some interesting ideas, to be sure. I'm actually going to save for spoilers. Not that there's much to spoil about historical events, obviously. But Christopher Nolan himself has spoken about the idea of not spoiling the film because it's still an interesting tale that you want to um, experience yourself, and having someone tell you everything about it right before you see it, for example, probably wouldn't be appreciated, certainly. um so yeah, it sort of boils down to that, in my opinion, that it's still worth not knowing. It's not, I wouldn't say you should research the film before you watch it. That's not the kind of film it is. It's not a documentary, it's definitely a drama. It's a much more of a human drama than I expected, to be honest. Much more of a crime drama than I expected. Now, it's very difficult to sort of prod at certain things and be critical of certain things because they are all to some extent based in the reality of events. For example, I felt like until like pretty much the very end, I felt like certain characters weren't utilized particularly well. I did not find actually Robert Downey Jr.'s side of things particularly engaging. Pretty much until the very end, where he was really able to let loose. But at the same time, it's all sort of based in historical realism, even though that stuff is supposed to be more particularly from his perspective anyway, so maybe not. But yeah, what I'm saying is it's strange to comment on that kind of thing as being out of place. I was tempted to say that Robert Downey Jr. was underutilized, and I would say that, but it's just like you can't force more out of these events, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, the film takes a really interesting approach, though, to its subject matter. Unsurprisingly, for a Nolan film, it's not told out of order, but it jumps between different timelines. Parts of the future taking place, a hearing with Oppenheimer taking place in a small meeting room, contrasted with Robert Downey Jr.'s Lewis Strauss, or Strauss. I prefer Strauss. I think both pronunciations are valid as well. In the I'm not sure where it is actually. I feel very out of touch with certain aspects of this. I tried to stay as in touch as I could, but I'm not very, I'm not the most worldly aware person. I like to try to be, as much as I can. I don't really know what a lot of the things in the film particularly meant. For example, where the hearings were taking place with Strauss. Um, but there's also the most chronological part is the part that focuses on Oppenheimer's journey from school into getting into the starting teaching quantum physics in America, going into leading the Manhattan Project. That stuff is all very chronologically sound, and was also for that reason the most engaging part of the movie for me. I found quite a big number of aspects of this film not as engaging as others, which is slightly awkward because I think its highs are exceptionally high. What's good about it is very intensely good, such as the performances, absolutely perfect across the board. It's very simple as that, actually. There isn't a single bad performance in this. In fact, they are all amazing, genuinely. Cillian Murphy, I do think, is the highlight. Obviously, this is the first time leading a film for Christopher Nolan, and it was well worth it, I think, because in my opinion, he delivers the best performance in the film by a fair bit. Not that anyone else is bad. Like I said, everyone is perfect. I think Cillian Murphy went above and beyond, though. His voice is really interesting to listen to. It reminds me a little bit of Charlie Cox's accent from Daredevil. Not because they're actually similar, but they're similar in the concept of these two people who are not from America, and they have very distinct American accents. They sound like Americans, but they don't sound like someone doing an accent. They don't sound like someone doing a really good accent. They just sound like someone with a really unique American voice, and I really appreciated that. And it did sound enough like Oppenheimer, in my opinion. A really strange thing that Nolan did in this film was, and I guess Ludwig as well, Ludwig Göransson, the composer, who did a fantastic job. Obviously, he's great. He did Tenet as well, and Mandalorian. But the film, in the I guess the combination of editing and score and all of these things coming together, it essentially plays like a really long montage of cutting between certain aspects with music pretty much constantly going on. This is something that I noticed. Way more music in this film than in other films. There's way less silence in this film than you'd expect. Silence is what lets moments breathe and make you feel like you're not being pushed along. But I get the sense that is what Nolan was going for. Given that this is a 3-hour film, and yet it doesn't let up really until sort of the last 50 minutes, I would say. But it really doesn't let up. It's a very fast film, despite how long it is, and that was something that I appreciated. That made it a much easier thing. Now, I want to sort of clear up sort of the way I'm going to be critical about this, just to reiterate how intense those good aspects are, such as the soundtrack, the sound design, the performances, the visuals, obviously spectacular, perhaps the best Nolan's ever done. And one other thing, obviously, being the Trinity test as the showstopper of the film being absolutely spectacular, genuinely riveting, and to sort of put a nail in all of this, I just want to say I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and not because I needed a piss, because I should say I had a headache the whole time, I needed the toilet the whole time, and I just got through it because I was that engaged with what was happening. I didn't want to get up because I didn't want to miss anything, because it was genuinely that exciting. But that sort of wore off for me after the Trinity test. Yeah, and I'm just going to say I'm going into spoiler territory now. If you really don't want to, obviously it sounds trivial in regards to a historical drama, but I'm still giving that warning. So if you really don't want to know anything, stop now. But yeah, the Trinity test itself, that was absolutely spectacular. Now, but actually, I do have to slightly agree with James from the Weekly Planet, Mr. Sunday Movies, that the explosion itself was slightly underwhelming. Although from a pacing and sound design perspective, that scene was absolutely perfect. It was genuinely like thrilling. I felt a lot in that moment physically as well, and the sound of where it drops or explodes and it's silence until the sound reaches everyone watching. That includes you. And you feel that it's a fucking, it's a nuclear blast. That's what it sounds like, and you felt it. It was insanely loud and well designed. But after the Trinity test, for me, for sort of the 40 minutes that followed the Trinity test, the film became, it almost took a different turn in terms of plot that did not interest me as much. Now, I mentioned how it's very strange to take these things in regards to something that's based in history, but it still applies. It's still a film, and I'm still going to make these criticisms whether or not they might just be stupid because of the nature of the film, but I'm still going to make them. I did not enjoy the 40 minutes that followed the Trinity test anywhere near as much as I enjoyed the first 2 hours and also the very end of the film. The very end of the film became much more exciting because, well, it's a very small number of things. I want to point out Jason Clarke. I should have mentioned him at the top actually, because he's actually fantastic in this movie. Going to be an underrated performance in my opinion. I think that is going to fly under people's radars, and yet I think he was the second best performance in this film, genuinely. That was fantastic stuff. And then skipping right to the very end, I do think the ending was fantastic. Actually, like I said, not as much of a downer as people say, but it was still very exciting. Um, it actually ends with a conversation between Oppenheimer and Einstein, where he references the conversation they had about how the nuclear bomb might ignite the atmosphere, might set off a chain reaction that would destroy the world. And Oppenheimer sort of says to himself that he thinks they did anyway. He thinks they did set off a chain reaction that destroyed the world, which to me was the most thought-provoking moment of the film, saved for last, which is very appropriate. And I think I have to agree. I'm not going to get political, obviously, but in a sense that obviously the Nazis and the Russians were developing these weapons as well. But the truth is, if they didn't exist at all, we'd probably be better off for it. There's something you have to acknowledge about the fact that maybe the Americans did have to make these bombs, but then of course they did things that it sort of plays into the moral quandary of bombing the Japanese and whether or not taking those lives was necessary to save more lives. I don't know how I feel about that. The film doesn't dictate to you how you should feel about that either, which I respected a lot. There's been some criticism of this film, some very trivial criticism, some criticism that has been clowned on, we should say, about it not passing the Bechdel test or whatever, or not including the Japanese perspective. And I just want to say, even though those things are true, the film never felt like it was preaching to me any kind of agenda. It did not feel like it was trying to make anyone a hero at all, even Oppenheimer. In fact, certainly not Oppenheimer. He's not a hero. He's just an interesting character in history. It's as simple as that. So I spoke to a number of flaws I found in the film, or personal gripes I had with the film, but I'm going to reiterate once again how good everything was about this film that was good. Josh Hartnett was also pretty spectacular. I found him very interesting to watch. I think his hair very nice as well, genuinely, which is a bit odd to point out, but still, I think it applies. I'm not sure what else to say. I mean, maybe I'll just speak a little bit about my experience with Nolan, in that he's definitely one of my favourite filmmakers. He would never be at the very top. He doesn't play into my really specific tastes. I just find him very engaging to watch. I find his films very engaging to watch. I haven't seen everything he's done. I haven't seen Following, or Memento, or Insomnia, or Inception, or Tenet, really. But I love the Dark Knight trilogy. I still think the Dark Knight is at the top. I love Interstellar. I love Dunkirk. Dunkirk is amazing. My God, I've seen The Prestige as well. So in terms of some kind of ranking, I would actually say Oppenheimer comes in third. Yeah, Dark Knight, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer, Interstellar, tied. And then the other Batman movies probably. It's very simple for me. Yes, I think I am running out of points. Oh, one more thing. Chris Stuckman. Sorry, I have to disagree with him again. Although it could have been sound mixing in his theatre, could have been off for some reason. Dialogue was very audible the entire time, I should point out. He said he only caught about 75% of dialogue. He said there was a similar, although not as, just still more mild, but still a similar problem to what was present in Tenet. I don't think that was true at all, at least not from my experience. Dialogue was very clear all throughout. So I'm going to stop it there. I think to collate all my points into a rating, I think 7.5 out of 10 is very appropriate. There it is. Because it sort of speaks to the fact that I think there are some extremely intensely good aspects about this. I think it's a masterpiece in a lot of ways. I think it's a story that needed to be told in this dramatized fashion. I want to speak to one more criticism, actually, in that it's a very personal thing. It's just the film was a bit more, let's say, on a human level than I perhaps was expecting. I was almost wanting it to be a bit more pretentious in a lot of ways, a bit more focused on the philosophy and moral gripes of building a weapon such as this. It was much more focused on Oppenheimer's life. Obviously, the Trinity test is the showstopper. The building of the atomic bomb is an intensely pivotal part of his life, perhaps the most important thing he ever did, perhaps the thing that cements him as the most important man in history. But I still almost wish it focused on those things a little bit more. I was more interested in seeing an exciting ride of creating the most powerful weapon known to man, and sort of I think it'd be a moral, a sort of a moral storm, I suppose, of these ideas swirling around each other and how they interact and whether or not it really is a good idea. And you get that, but it's sort of bogged down. You almost have the whole movie of that bogged down by other stuff. I personally did not, from my experience, of consuming this piece of entertainment, as Christopher Nolan acknowledges it as, I did not need this film to be 3 hours because of the stuff that made it 3 hours. The human drama did not interest me as much as the stuff surrounding the actual building of the bomb itself did, and the test, and all of those things. Which is why I found Robert Downey Jr.'s character not particularly engaging, unfortunately, despite how good he is in the film. He's probably going to get a Best Supporting Actor nomination, and I think that is entirely justified. I just didn't find that aspect of the film particularly engaging, not because it was in black and white either. There was nothing wrong with that, actually. But it just didn't grab me in the same way that the moving parts did. In fact, I might not even say that the human stuff didn't count, because obviously his affair with Jean Tatlock was important and a somewhat interesting part of the film. And I want to reiterate, it's not because it's in black and white, but I would probably say, actually, it's all of that stuff. It's probably the black and white stuff that I don't need. I think the stuff in the hearing room with Jason Clarke's character was very engaging, as sort of the afterthought of what Oppenheimer did, leading up to and after the test and detonation of the bombs in Japan. So honestly, it is the black and white segments, what they represent, that I personally do not feel like I needed in the film as much. And I think I would have found it a much more concise watch. And I know it's not meant to be. It's almost meant to be this big, unwieldy monster representing this insane aspect of human history. And I respect that. But purely as a film, there are aspects of it that I did not need as much, which I think is okay to say. Still, it was an absolutely spectacular blast of a film. Like, it's surprisingly thrilling, and Christopher Nolan absolutely wanted to do that. He understands that. He understands how to make films exciting, even if they are pretty much exclusively dialogue. So big props to him. I'm super excited for what he does next. I really hope he does a Bond movie, actually. I think that'd be awesome for him to kick-start the next Bond with Henry Cavill, ideally. That would be amazing. So that was Oppenheimer, my review for Oppenheimer. I absolutely recommend that you see it, obviously, despite what I've said. The flaws are very personal, although they are very present as well. But once again, the highs are so high, and the lows are personal lows for me anyway. So please go see Oppenheimer, go support this film, go support Barbie as well. I didn't talk about that. I think the Barbenheimer phenomenon is awesome, genuinely. Although Barbie just doesn't interest me as a film to go and see as much as Oppenheimer did. And, you know, to sort of one more point about sort of it not being as much of a downer as I expected, I didn't feel like I needed to watch Barbie after seeing Oppenheimer. So I don't know what that says. I probably could have seen Barbie first and been fine with it. Either way. First of all, last of all, actually, I just want to thank Zach Milne, another movie reviewing channel, or a movie reviewing channel. That's not what our channel is about, obviously. It's just something I do from time to time when I've seen a film in cinemas I feel strongly enough to talk about. But Zach Milne commented on the last one, Mission Impossible 1, and I just wanted to thank him for his kind words. And that's all. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. That's all I've got. See you next time.